Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is AI Without Compromise, Why Data Sovereignty is the Next Enterprise Battleground. I'm joined by Clayton Bryan, Head of Enterprise at Quill Meetings. Clayton, welcome.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, I think this will be really interesting, and certainly data sovereignty and all the other topics around that are definitely hot these days. Just to get us started, could you give us an introduction? Tell us a little about yourself and your journey and how you got to Quill Meetings, and maybe a little bit about Quill Meetings as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I have spent the last 10 years as an early stage investor at a shop called 500 Global, formerly known as 500 Startups. And I started as as it relates to my journey with Quill, as I was doing my work as an investor, and I'd be meeting with hundreds of founders on a monthly basis. I found myself, constantly needing something that could capture my meeting notes, help me process those meeting notes, help me stay on top of my job, essentially, because I was just talking to so many different founders. And Quill was introduced to me. I happened to know the founder, Michael, and he told me he was working on Quill, and I said, hey, let me take a look at this because I can absolutely use this. The analogy I like to use a lot is I felt like a very busy doctor in a very busy hospital. I'd be, going from meeting to meeting to meeting with different founders, talking about everything from portfolio support to fundraising to, in some cases, even playing the role of a founder marriage counselor, trying to make sure that my teams did not have fisticuffs with each other. So it was just a lot of information for me to always have to process. And Michael said, hey, check out Quill. And so I started using Quill, and I quickly became a super user of Quill. And I love Quill so much that I said, hey, I think that you really have something special here, and I wanna join, and I wanna help you out. And here I am leading enterprise. And some of the things that make Quill special is really around the architecture. And the architecture is built in a way in which the transcription is local. The summarization does get processed in the cloud. But if you're enterprise, you can bring over your own LLM stack. So we have a BYO LLM feature. And so all the data stays under the control of those enterprises. And so once I was able to tell my compliance officer that at 500, and I broke down the architecture, why is this different? I received the blessing to use it. And once I saw that story up front, I said, hey, if I had to go through this, and I'm at a $2.5 billion AUM operation, I'm sure that there's going to be other users in regulated industries that are also going to really want to have the same AI magic at their fingertips, but know that they're going to get blocked by their compliance policy. And so I wanted to come on board to help lead that charge because I think it's such a special product.
Yeah. I mean, Quill's tagline is AI without compromise. And I mean, that's in the world we live in today. That's a pretty bold claim. Especially where, a lot of the AI tools that companies use, they're presented to them in a way that it's a cloud service. You have to put your data in the cloud. Data sovereignty is kind of questionable. Data residency is questionable. I mean, what makes Quill different? And you hit on it a little bit, but let's go a little deeper there. And why did the founding team decide to build it this way, from the ground up?
Yeah, so the founding team has a really strong philosophy around local AI and around data sovereignty. Your data should stay with you; it should stay controlled by you, and that's a part of their first principles thinking. And so that as it relates to just everything, any of their data, right? And so because of that DNA that was present with the founders, that you see that also within the product itself. So again, the audio never leaves your device for Quill. We leverage Whisper for local transcription processing, and then by default, the summarization in the minutes will go to the cloud. However, our enterprise clients, we have a BYO LLM, and all the enterprises, that's what they choose to do. So if they leverage, they have their own GPU cluster, they have their own private cloud. They're able to put Quill, have the processing go through their stack, so that they understand and they have full control over where that data goes. And that's the way that we think it should be.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely unique. And I've used several, probably no surprise, but I've used several different types of services, and most of them have been cloud based. And, honestly, in the end, you start to wonder, there's a lot of, and in my business, a lot of NDA type information that conversations I had with my clients and all that, I just got really uncomfortable about. So I could see where that makes a lot of sense, and particularly tied to it's on my local device. And then it sounds like there are plenty of enterprise options to set that up and have the architecture run in a much better controlled way. And it sounds like you also offer this kind of an air gapped option, right? So you can
Yep.
bring your own model, disconnect from the internet. And I'm curious, as you talk to companies and have been working with companies, what kind of organizations are choosing that path, and does the demand for that level of isolation tell you about kind of where enterprise AI adoption is headed?
Yeah, it's the companies that have the most to lose. And so it's companies that are dealing with confidential, classified information. So, think enterprises that touch the power grid, that touch defense, that are deep tech, that they can't have vital information seep out. Or in other cases, they just
Mhm.
they need to be absolutely sure and have absolute control of the servers where that information resides and is processed. And so those are the types
Mhm.
that are saying, hey, we've been kind of left out in the cold as it relates to all this AI magic. We obviously they talk to peers and friends, and they understand the power of what some of these note takers can do, but they absolutely also know that the most sensitive information that they have will be discussed in these meetings, and
Mhm.
they want to make sure that it is fully closed off to the internet and in any type of breach
Mm.
capability.
I would think that works well in highly regulated industries too, or even like medical, healthcare, where you've got HIPAA requirements, and there's a lot of regulatory issues, or even like in Europe, where privacy protection is much greater, and in some of the states in the U.S. too. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And if I can just add, we've had a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
very conservative, staunch GDPR type of shops reach
Yeah.
out to us because they said, "Hey, your architecture is really exactly what we need."
Mm.
And so I've over the last 4 weeks, I mean, I've kind of gone on a little bit of a, not in person, but a virtual tour of different EU enterprises that are telling me, just how critical their GDPR stance is, and just how exhaustive of a search that they've done to
Mm.
try to find products that fit their policies.
Yeah. I mean, it does sort of make sense too, because, let's be honest, it's a lot easier to set up a cloud application with a single delivery method than it is to build something that gives you end user choice, or business choice, and is flexible enough to use a model, bring your model, deploy locally, deploy in the cloud, deploy in a hybrid way. I mean, that's more complexity, which certainly adds to cost, right?
Yeah, it does. So convenience is a big key of it, key part, right? But like you said, if you are regulated by an alphabet soup regulator, if CMMC, ITAR, GDPR, all the acronyms, right? Then you convenience is not as significant to you. You really absolutely need to have your information control over where it lives, where it's processed.
Mhm.
That's just table stakes for you.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking earlier, you talked about an interesting adoption patterns where, you have a individual who discovers Quill, starts to use it, is happy with it, and then, later their IT team, their CISO investigate it, and they end up, really surprised that it works the way you say it works.
Yep.
I mean, what does that tell you about the gap between kind of enterprise expectations around AI and AI vendors and what they're mostly seeing delivered, particularly on the privacy front, where we know there's a lot of risk and concern.
Well, I'll say, CISOs, compliance officers are really starting to wake up to the fact that you can't trust these third party servers for the highly regulated industries. And, it is, there's a lot of fear.
Mhm.
There's a lot of fear about getting subpoenaed or breaches. And so, naturally the gut reaction is, hey, you can't use this, right? Because they're
Yeah.
just thinking of, okay, well, you're probably just like everything else. You're probably just storing in a third party cloud. You might have good data protection agreements, but we still don't trust that. But as soon as they start to scrutinize the architecture and they see
Mhm.
that, hey, our data sovereignty is not bolted on. This is
Yeah.
a foundational principle that is at the core of our architecture. And once they understand that, then they give the green light.
Yeah. I mean, that is a very good story when we think about a lot of the different conversations that I've been having lately, and on the show too. Like we've talked a lot about data sovereignty and governance, built-in governance. With companies are bringing more agents, from that POC, proof of concept kind of environment out into an actual workflow and start to scale up. And most organizations are kind of bolting compliance on their existing tools, maybe. And it seems like you guys have taken a different approach when you're designing privacy into the architecture from the start. I mean, why do you think bolt on won't work or is broken? And then what should companies, really look at when they're evaluating AI tools?
Well, just thinking about like the retrofit of doing that. I mean, governance can't be a layer; it has to be the foundation. And if it's not, you're going to leave yourself vulnerable to things that are going to be much more expensive, timely, just big headaches down the line. And so it's important that at the start you're thinking about this. And at every step, every iteration of the product, it's something that is a standard that you are building by. Because it's just not going to work. We've seen, some of the other as a parallel to this, just in terms of just even the adoption within AI. Like I do think that there's this notion of a productivity J curve. If you look at innovations throughout the course of history, you can't just bolt on an electric motor to a steam workflow. You can't bolt on governance and data sovereignty to an
Yeah.
existing SaaS product that has never had to think about that before. There's just too much that you're going to have to go back and fix. Too many holes that are possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've been writing and talking a lot about in the last 5 6 months about governance by design. The idea that we have to shift the way we think about governance in the agentic world from a process that sits in the top at the end to something that's inherent inside of the platform that has to be built from the ground up, because of the fact that you're talking about governing something that operates at machine speed. It has access to all sorts of tools and data, and it's just such a risk if you don't think about it in this new way of from the ground up versus from the outside in.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's been our findings as well.
Yeah. So I know your co-founder Michael built Angel List syndicates, led Angel List Ventures, past $1 billion in assets, and you also have an investor background. How does that background shape the way you think about building Quill, especially around what enterprise buyers actually need versus what gets funded?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a founding team that's managed billions in assets and sit on boards of public companies, they don't need someone to explain why a hedge fund won't send meeting recordings to a third party cloud. They've been that buyer, right? And so it's just deep domain expertise, deep domain experience, expertise as it relates to how these industries think. I myself, I have a lot more gray hairs than I'd like to admit for my age because I've gone through a lot of battles with my compliance officer. So I understand, what it takes to have tooling that is compliant. And it's absolutely magical when it delivers the cutting edge AI output, and you're doing it in a way that's compliant. You're doing it in a way that all of the gatekeepers inside can live with, can be happy with. In fact, one of our enterprise clients is a publicly listed deep tech company, and the CISO sent us over a security survey. We answered it, and as soon as he understood the architecture, he became an advocate. He was like, this is a green light, right? Like it's kind of like we've been looking for something like this, and we've been so frustrated because we haven't found the tooling that understands the different hurdles that we're going to have to go through because of the sensitivity of the data and the in some cases the standards, many cases the standards of the regulatory bodies that are governing them.
you know, most of the people, and this is a common thing, right? Most of the people that are using ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, all the Gemini, the other kind of major tools, they're really sort of only using it personally outside of work, maybe mostly kind of as a search function. So they're not really getting real leverage in their professional lives, right? Why do you think that exists? And then how can Quill help close that gap and make it more relevant from a business perspective?
Yeah, so ChatGPT is a great tool with a massive professional trust deficit. Quill solves that trust problem for most information-rich moments in any professional day. And so, I think it really, again, it goes down to, we're not asking you to change your workflow. We sit at the OS level, we capture the meeting, and we deliver the intelligence without requiring you to trust a third party with your most sensitive conversations. And a model company can say like, we're not going to train on your data, but really where is it going to rest, where is it going to store, where is it going to be stored? What happens if that company gets acquired? Like what happens to the data that's in that system, right?
Mhm.
Well, for our enterprises that are leveraging bring your own LLM, all the data resides within your own infrastructure, so you don't have to ask those types
Mm.
of questions.
Yeah, I mean that certainly builds a lot more confidence, and I think the other thing a lot of people kind of don't really understand the risk of using a public model for things that should be controlled, like privacy information, or even like in my business, a lot I get a lot of NDA. Information from clients and as in the conversation, and like I run a local model that's gapped for that because I'm certainly not going to upload the slide deck into Claude or ChatGPT or anything like that because there is certainly risk. So I think, a lot of people don't maybe realize that, or if they do, they don't really know how to work around that. So that really resonates. So, beyond business meetings, which, obviously that's a very good use case for you, but you've talked about other use cases though, like, oh, I have a doctor's appointment and I'm going to, for a family member, for example, I want to record that, or maybe I'm having a mortgage conversation and I want to document that at the bank. Situations where privacy is really critical from a personal perspective, right? And the stakes are high. How do you think about the line between enterprise and personal AI? And is that line maybe not even useful anymore?
Yeah, well, I think that the line between enterprise and personal AI is dissolving. The question is always the same: who controls the data? The answer should always be the person whose life it represents.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. We didn't build separate products for enterprise and personal use. The architecture that protects a
Right.
defense contractor's classified briefing is the same architecture that protects your family's medical information.
Mm.
That's what local first means.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense too. That really the problem is the same, right? We're trying to protect whatever that data or information is, and knowing where it is, how I've managed to store it and control it and use it. Those kinds of things that actually gives you that confidence that you can use there.
Exactly.
So, I've been writing lately quite a lot about what I've called the automation trap, and it's where companies, enterprise AI, they bring it in, they bring it into their existing workflow, but they don't redesign the process. They don't rethink the work and how that's going to work in this new environment with the new agents and tools. Quill seems to go further than just transcription into automating like the post meeting workflows, like updating CRM or creating a task in my to-do list, task management software, whatever that might be. How do you think about that transition from capturing information to actually acting on it in some way, and how you could enable that?
Yeah, I think we sit at a great place to do that. We have enterprise customers who are manually copying and pasting meeting notes into their CRM, multiple steps, multiple systems, losing context at every handoff. Quill can push structured data directly into Salesforce, HubSpot, Affinity, Pipedrive. The meetings become the source of truth. And so we see this as a way to help to improve this workflow, and show that there can be an evolution of this workflow where within my Quill, we have a Quill agent called Quilliam. I can have a call. This week I've had several calls with enterprise clients of Quill. And as soon as I'm done with that meeting, I just tell the Quill agent, go into our CRM, update that contact, update that object with additional context from this meeting. So that's really kind of where we see it going. I saw that you wrote about the shift from tools to coworkers.
Yeah.
Meeting intelligence is the foundational input for agentic workflows.
Yeah.
Before an AI agent can act on what happened in the meeting, something has to capture what happened accurately, securely, and in a structured form. That's Quill's role in this agentic stack.
Mm. Yeah, that fits really well into this kind of thought process of both of how do I, how do I integrate this into the work, but then how do I make the work better by changing the workflow, changing the process. And I mean, for years in the industry, we've talked about how bad a lot of companies' CRM data is because it just didn't get updated, or it got updated in multiple ways in the different formats with the wrong emails, with the, whatever, right? So having a way to automate that and make sure that it's consistently done, I can see, a huge benefit from a data management perspective as well.
Data management, but also just think about we're removing aspects of just tedious work, a lot of
Mhm.
manual work, right? And so now that you have time back, that time that you formerly were spending, just reporting stuff over to your CRM, right? Maybe auditing it, right? I can just outsource all of that to my agent at this point.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just CRMs. We plug also into project management
Yeah.
platforms like Linear and Trello, and so I can, if I find a bug in Quill, I can quickly basically have the Quilliam, the Quill agent, update a Linear ticket. Or a feature request if I'm talking to a client that wants to do something that we don't currently offer, right? And so it's just making me much faster. It's making other organizations much faster and giving time back so that you can now do other things, be more productive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that conversation is interesting in business today because a lot of the hype has been, oh, this is going to change, take away jobs. It's going to, mean that a lot of people won't have this. What's that because things do change. And to me, it's been more about I can see how skills shift and up level, and even your ability to do higher level tasks and take care of things that have much more value, because a lot of those kind of routine things that I had to do can be automated and I don't have to waste my time on them when I could easily, be out delivering another project or working on strategy, that sort of thing that is higher value to my company.
Exactly, and I think that uh, effective, tasteful, applied AI will allow you to spend time on the things that you want to spend more time on. Not the
Mm,
tedium, not the mundane aspects of work, right? If you're a deal person, Quill should allow you to spend more time talking to other humans and doing more deals, right? And
right.
not the like the admin side of it, right? And so that's really important. And you touched on something around jobs and job loss, and I think that again, properly structured applied AI will allow you to do a lot more. There will be more jobs than less. I think it's a little bit scary because like, oh, it has the ability to do all this automation. But I think it's going to also open up new opportunities, and so we're looking forward to those new opportunities, those new workflows, those new jobs. I
Yeah.
tell people all the time. 26 years ago, in 2000, the term data science, wasn't really, an industry.
Right.
Today, you can get a degree from many of the world's top institutions in
Yep.
data science, right? And so I think we're seeing something similar. Another analogy I like to, or allegory I like to go back to is I remember when I was growing up, I used to see an acronym on certain job descriptions, WPM, words per minute.
Yeah.
They wanted to see, how good of a typist are you, right? And typing was a skill that not everyone in the 90s and 80s, not everybody was
Yep.
proficient in typing. I think we're in a similar something that rhymes because now it's about how AI native are you, how
Yeah.
effective are you with workflows, with automation,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it can be scary from certain vantage points. But I
Yeah.
think, looking at our history, pattern matching with our history around innovation, I think
Yeah.
that we're going to be in a much more value, creative, and equitable future because of the technology that is now
Yeah.
starting to emerge.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can and certainly be seen that it is going to open up new avenues. It's going to mean that certain jobs are going to need different skills, new skills, whatever. But at the same time, there's opportunity. Like I know I was talking to a CTO of a company not long ago, talking about development and vibe coding and how a lot of developers have been really fearful that by doing this vibe coding and bringing in coding tools automates a lot of the process. It means developers aren't needed, and that's absolutely not the truth. In his case, he's like, no, no. In fact, that's the opposite is true. It means that the developers in the process are even more valuable, but they have to learn new skills, right? They provide the conceptual model, they provide the output, they help make sure that things are built correctly and work correctly, because you're thinking about it like you've got a room full of very junior devs. I don't want them doing everything. I want them to do what they do well, and then I want my developers, that have been there for years and have the depth and capability to do what they do well, and then we have a much better, more productive system.
Exactly. I think that with Cogent specifically, you're able the developers I talk to, I work with at Quill and others that I work with through my career as an investor. They're telling me that their job, the nature of their job is changing every 6 months. They're not manually coding as much anymore. Instead, they're managing 5 to 10 instances of Claude Code or leveraging Cursor or Codex to go much faster. So
Right.
we're going in a direction where the nature of work is changing, the tooling is changing. Now you probably don't want to vibe code something that ends up in production, but you should absolutely be vibe coding prototypes, right?
Right.
So maybe instead of more PRDs, you see more prototypes that are vibe coded so that folks can more quickly, easily understand the direction that our product's going. I vibe code features all the time, and I sit
Mhm.
with enterprise clients and say, "Hey, is this something that you would like to see in the product?" And then a week later, I can push that live in the product, right? After it's
Right.
been coded up the right way. So I think it's allowing us to go much faster in areas of development and business building where previously there'd just be much longer feedback loops, much longer development loops. The timelines are compressing.
Yeah. So, let's sit back and if we get out our crystal ball, and believe me, in AI world, that's a tough one, right? Because
Yeah.
everything moves very quickly. And, I used to ask this question. I would go like, 24 to 36 months out. Some days I feel like 24 to 36 hours out is a good question. But anyway, let's think about looking ahead a little bit. As AI agents become more capable, and then, of course, privacy concerns are going to continue to be top of mind, and or maybe even get more so. Where do you think the market's heading? Will local first, privacy by design approaches, is that going to become the standard? And do you think most companies, that continue trading data sovereignty over convenience, or are there just going to be better solutions available so that they can actually address those issues?
Yeah, I think that the honest answer, both paths will coexist. Convenience will always win for consumer use cases,
Yeah.
but for the regulated industry, financial services, healthcare, legal, defense, government, local first will become the minimum
Mhm.
standard, not the premium option.
Right.
Regulation is a one-way ratchet. The SEC enforcement isn't getting lighter. GDPR fines aren't getting smaller. CMMC requirements aren't getting less strict. Every year, the compliance bar goes up, and cloud-dependent AI tools are on the wrong side of that trend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so Clayton, really interesting conversation. I really appreciate you joining today, and I think this is such a hot topic that we really do need to bring to the front, for everybody, from a business perspective, especially. A lot of concern there. But before I let you go, I always like to ask at the end of the show, can you recommend somebody, thought leader, an author, podcaster, somebody that you think the audience would get real value out of if they check them out and followed?
Well, before I do that, one other thing I wanted to do with the last question,
Sure.
I wanted to draw a parallel to encryption.
Hmm.
20 years ago, HTTPS was optional. Now it's table stakes.
Yeah.
Data sovereignty for AI processing is on the same trajectory. The question isn't whether local first becomes the standard for sensitive
Mm,
context. The question is how quickly.
yeah.
So I think that's important. And the companies that build for sovereignty now won't have to retrofit later.
Yeah.
That's a structural advantage, and that's why we built Quill this way from day one.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just add a little bit more to that last
Hmm.
question, and then I'll answer the final question. Uh,
Yeah. No, I do think you're
what
right, though. I think data sovereignty by design, that certainly makes a lot more sense to me than the way we've approached this in the past. So
Yeah, yeah, and 100%, 100%. I think more and more people are going to wake up to that. I think it's been happening. We've been seeing it, but the momentum of that realization is going to start to compound faster and faster.
mm,
Um, and so the last question, who to follow? I'm a big fan of Matthew Berman. He has a YouTube show. He does live shows, but he's very in the weeds in terms of the latest models, who's releasing what. But I love the way that he breaks things down with his video podcast, because it's easily digestible for the non-technical user as well. So if you're curious about cutting edge, he just did something about the latest ChatGPT model,
mm,
5.4. He's a great go-to, and he's also getting some really fantastic interviews with some heavy hitters
mm,
from the world of AI. So the
great.
CEOs of large companies, but also some of his videos specifically in terms of how to leverage current tools. I mean, I just went down a rabbit hole with everything that he's done with OpenClaw, for example. Really, really fascinating stuff for both the technical and the non-technical users.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. That's a very good recommendation. Certainly, the audience should check them out. So again, Clayton, thank you so much. Really interesting conversation. I really appreciate you joining.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Michael.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.